Sam Bleacher. I'm an independent consultant these days. There are provisions in the climate bill that would provide for offsets under WTO GATT arrangements for countries that do not control their carbon emissions. And I just wonder, I guess there are a couple of questions one might ask. One is whether you think they're legal in light of the special environmental and other kinds of natural resources protections, exemptions in WTO. And the other is whether you think they will even matter as they're written. I don't know if you're familiar with the details of the provision. I'm sure Bob is. And whether they will even, whether they're even broad enough to make any difference.
The the WTO legality is a complicated issue, like all legal matters. I think I'm of the view, having examined it myself, because I also teach in the law school with a lawyer who knows about these things. So I've been extending discussions, and then Steve Charnowitz, etc. here have been looking into it. I think the legal opinion is divided, but what I'm convinced about is that if we use the cap and trade mechanism, and if we don't have 100% auction, if we give even a fraction of it for free to Robert, to you, to me, different firms, different industries, different fractions, unless it's an identical fraction, you are necessarily having a differential cash subsidy in relation to the market premium. If it's a differential subsidy, unfortunately, there is a SCM, Subsidies and Countervailing Measures Agreement, of 95 again, like the GPA, and it would immediately be an actionable subsidy. Now, so the Europeans have been using cap and trade, but nobody bothered about it because they weren't threatening carbon tariffs against other people if they weren't doing something which the Europeans didn't like. So that's one problem, and I think we would be just thrown out of court immediately on that until we get to the great idea of the president, which is that everything will be auctioned off. I don't know if it'll ever happen in the US system. But the second problem is, suppose we play that game, all right? And already it's created massive resentment elsewhere, you know, the bill, the WM Max, because that is the old-fashioned attitude, namely, you do what we are doing or we hit you, right? Now, when the Europeans were threatening the same kind of thing against us, you remember the French Prime Minister's plan to hit us with tariffs because we hadn't signed Kyoto. That time, you should have seen what the Americans and the Australians said about the French. So it's ironic that we are now contemplating the same sort of thing against others, but just think of it a little bit long. We have the lowest fuel tax in the world on gasoline, right, which at the pump, almost every other country except in the Middle East has about 3 or 4 times that much tax. It could easily be called a carbon tax. And then there could be cases against us for having too low, right? So do we want to go down? I think the president was absolutely right, and whether his lawyers were good or bad, I don't know, in saying this was WTO illegal. And I think he just tried to stop it.
Right.
Because I don't think politically, economically, it's a good way to go. And this is the old kind of Bush-era tactic. You know, you're just going to use bluster and tell you got to do this. That's the sort of thing which puts up people's backs. And countries like China and India have no law. They're not little countries. And so I don't think it was wise. So the legality issue, I think, in 2 weeks, if you write to me, I'll have a slightly better answer. But right now, the opinion is divided on whether, but the cap and trade is certainly actionable, meaning virtually illegal.
Well, as many of you may know, I'm a critic of cap and trade and a supporter of carbon taxes.
That's good.
For climate change. But but it is a very interesting, climate is a very interesting issue with respect to trade in two respects. One is that it opens up a new area of really global trade. And I believe that is the export of more energy efficient technologies and alternative fuels. I think it will fuel the globalization process.
No pun intended.
Right, no pun intended, because I believe that the only way that we will be able to enlist the cooperation and full participation of China and India, but particularly China, is through joint ventures in the development and sale of these technologies, to make it as much in her interest as it is in our trading interest, again. And I think that, so I think climate is likely to be a real driver of global, over the long term, of both trade and the globalization process. At the same time, the issue of leakage, as they say, which is to say a shift of jobs to countries with lower carbon, lower price on carbon, whether through cap and trade or regulation or carbon tax. Even though I think it would be very hard to show that that was what was happening, and I would be doubtful that very much of it would happen. I just don't think it's a large enough factor.
There are many studies which show it's not likely to happen.
But it will be, it is a very
political,
easily understood story, narrative, for people to, that people will listen to, because it goes to a pre-existing anxiety, which is they're going to lose their job, which is an anxiety everybody has.
That's a good point.
In this era. So we're going to have to figure out a way to address that politically, in a way that protects both the trading system and the macroeconomics of this.
And relieves the anxiety.
Yes.